The hush that fell over Maison Toile, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, was instant and absolute. Silverware stilled midair. Wine glasses hovered untouched. The pianist stopped playing mid-note, fingers suspended above ivory keys. Every pair of eyes turned to table 12, where a man in a custom-tailored navy suit glared at the waitress before him. His voice, cold and thunderous, had just sliced through the air with a demand that left no room for grace. "Is this what you call rare? Are you trying to poison me?" The words rang out, bouncing off mirrored walls and gilded moldings. Naomi Clark stood perfectly still, her posture upright, her hands trembling behind her apron. Her throat tightened, but her gaze never dropped. She had worked too hard to be reduced to a mistake on a stake. The man who berated her, Grayson Wolfe, tech billionaire, and the subject of countless magazine covers, tapped impatient fingers on the table, his face flushed with arrogance. The entire dining room held its breath, waiting for the waitress's response. Naomi had never sought the spotlight. At 28, she was a single mother juggling 2 jobs, a mountain of student loans, and a daughter with a bright smile and an even brighter dream of becoming a dancer. Maison Toile had been her second job, the one that promised higher tips and hope. In the gleaming kitchens of the restaurant, under the leadership of the meticulous and temperamental chef Olivier Renard, she had learned the art of invisible perfection. Folded napkins had to be symmetrical. Glassware had to glint like cut crystal. Every table setting was a canvas of precision, and any deviation was a black mark. Naomi thrived in that quiet discipline. There was something calming in the routine, the rhythm of service, the polished script, the elegance of doing things exactly right. Until tonight. She hadn't even been scheduled to serve Grayson Wolfe. That table had been assigned to Julian, a veteran waiter with nerves of steel and legs to match. But fate tripped Julian on the kitchen floor with a rogue parsley sprig, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing and leaving him wincing on the ground, ankle twisted. The maitre d', pale and panicked, had scanned the room before locking eyes with Naomi. "You're up," he'd said. She had no time to question it. That was rule number 1 at Maison Toile. Don't question orders, especially in front of guests. So she had smoothed her apron, inhaled sharply, and approached table 12 with the grace of a woman who'd memorized every wine region in France, but still took the subway home. Grayson Wolfe hadn't looked at her then, hadn't acknowledged her greeting or the menu she offered. He had muttered, "Riesling," with the air of someone swatting away a fly. Naomi had fetched the bottle, a rare Mosel vintage recommended by Chef Olivier himself, and poured a precise sample. Grayson had waved it off, uninterested in her explanation, muttering something about no cheap stuff. The order had been a landmine. Wagyu beef, seared rare, black garlic sauce on the side, no garnish, truffle mashed potatoes, also no garnish. Timing, temperature, and plating were sacred in Chef Olivier's kitchen. Omitting a garnish was sacrilege. But Naomi had relayed the request with surgical clarity, and the dish was prepared precisely as instructed. When she returned with the food, she had even managed a soft smile as she placed the plates. Grayson had eaten in silence at first. Then, suddenly, the fork clinked loudly against the plate. The chair scraped backward, and the thunder came. "This is raw," he barked. "Do you want to be responsible for food poisoning a billionaire?" The words sent a ripple through the air. Naomi felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her voice level. "I'm sorry, sir. I can have the chef prepare another one, cooked a bit longer if you'd prefer." Grayson laughed bitterly. "You think I have time to wait? Do you even know what rare means? You should. You work in one of the top restaurants in the city. Or is that too hard for someone like you?" Naomi didn't flinch. Years of swallowing insults had prepared her for moments like this, but it was one thing to endure rudeness in silence, quite another to be publicly humiliated in front of 100 silent strangers. "I understand, sir," she said calmly. "Let me correct it immediately." She lifted the plate and turned toward the kitchen, her spine straight. Then Grayson raised his voice again, this time loud enough for every table to hear. "Ridiculous," he said, sweeping his arm toward the room. "Do you know how much I'm paying to eat here? And this is the service? They should hire competent staff instead of—" He stopped, just short of saying something worse. The room froze. Naomi turned. She had spent years being polite, agreeable, invisible. But something shifted inside her. She thought of Zoe at home, her sweet little girl asleep behind a lavender curtain in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. She thought of scraped knees, late rent notices, birthday cakes made from store-brand frosting, and she remembered every customer who had called her sweetheart like an insult. She faced Grayson Wolfe, her voice quiet but unshakable. "You can buy a steak, sir," she said, "but you can't buy decency." Her words, not louder than a whisper, dropped like an anvil in the silence. They hung in the air, heavier than crystal chandeliers, sharper than steak knives. Grayson's mouth parted slightly in disbelief. Across the restaurant, a wine glass tipped, forgotten. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, somewhere near the bar, someone clapped. Soft, unsure, then another, then a few more. The applause spread like dawn breaking over the city, gentle, certain. Grayson's face darkened to crimson. "How dare you?" he sputtered. "You don't talk to me like that. Do you know who I am?" Naomi didn't respond. She simply met his gaze, unblinking. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, "and I know that doesn't entitle you to treat anyone with contempt." The maitre d' rushed to the table, apologizing profusely, offering to comp the meal, to explain the misunderstanding, to undo what could not be undone. But Grayson was already on his feet. He tossed a wad of cash onto the table, more than the entire meal cost, and stormed toward the exit. His bodyguards followed. His business partner, wide-eyed and silent, trailed behind. Naomi remained still, her breath shallow, her palms damp. Around her, whispers stirred again. Someone muttered, "Good for her." A woman at table 7 nodded toward her and said, "Brave girl." Naomi felt her knees tremble beneath her. She had no idea if she had just lost her job, but she knew one thing for certain: she had kept her dignity. And in that moment, it felt like everything. The alley behind Maison Toile smelled faintly of old rosemary and lemon peels tossed from the prep station, but Naomi Clark barely registered the scent. She leaned against the cold brick wall, her chest heaving softly, her hands still tingling from adrenaline. Somewhere behind the thick metal door, the dining room buzzed with the muffled sounds of stunned conversations, kitchen orders, and uncertain footsteps. But out here, in this narrow slice of quiet under the city's towering skyline, time had paused. She had just stood up to one of the most powerful men in Manhattan and survived at least for now. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, but she ignored it. She needed a minute to breathe, to remind herself that she hadn't imagined the moment when the entire restaurant applauded not the billionaire, but her. The door creaked open, and Marta stepped outside, holding a small glass of water. Her short, dark curls bounced as she walked, and her round face was etched with concern. "Here," she said gently, handing the glass over. "Take a sip. You look like you've just stepped out of a war." Naomi let out a shaky laugh, accepting the water with both hands. "Feels like it." Marta stood beside her, not speaking for a moment, just staring at the sky above. "You know," she finally said, "I've worked here 12 years, seen a lot of rude guests, a few celebrities with egos bigger than their checks, but no one has ever said anything like that before. What you did, it was brave." Naomi looked at her, eyes wide, or stupid, depending on who's in charge tomorrow morning. Marta shrugged. "Maybe. But every single person inside, they're rooting for you, even Chef Renard." Naomi arched a brow. "Chef? The same chef who screamed at me last week for mispronouncing bouillabaisse?" Marta grinned. "He was furious when Grayson Wolfe insulted his steak, but when you said what you said, he put down his knife and whispered, 'Enfin.'" Naomi blinked. "What does that mean?" "At last." They stood in silence again, the tension softening just slightly. "Go wash your face," Marta said, patting her shoulder. "Then come back inside. The maitre d' hasn't said anything about sending you home. Yet." That "yet" hung in the air like fog, but Naomi nodded. Inside the staff restroom, she splashed cold water on her cheeks, her reflection pale and wide-eyed in the mirror. Her stomach twisted as she thought of Zoe. What if she'd just lost her job? What if she'd risked everything because she couldn't keep her mouth shut for 5 more minutes? But something deep inside her said no. No, she hadn't lost herself. She'd found a piece of herself she didn't know was still alive. That night, she finished her shift quietly. The maitre d' avoided her eyes but didn't reprimand her. The anniversary couple at table 5 left her a $100 tip and a note that said, "Thank you for speaking truth." The solo diner with the Churchill biography gave her a nod and simply said, "Well said." When Naomi walked through the doors of her tiny apartment that night, the lavender curtain separating Zoe's corner rustled slightly. A sleepy voice called out, "Mommy?" Naomi tiptoed over and knelt beside the small fold-out mattress. "I'm here, sweet pea," she whispered, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Go back to sleep." Zoe blinked slowly. "Did you win the tip game tonight?" Naomi smiled. "Maybe." "Did you get me those sparkly shoelaces?" "Next time, I promise." "Okay." Zoe rolled over and was asleep again within seconds. Naomi sat on the floor for a moment, just breathing in the scent of vanilla shampoo and warm blankets. Tomorrow, the world might crash around her. But tonight, she had her daughter. And she had told the truth. The next morning, her phone exploded at 6:31 a.m. The first vibration rattled her nightstand. Then came another, and another. She squinted at the screen. Dozens of missed messages, notifications, unknown numbers. Her stomach flipped. She tapped open one text from Marta. "You're not gonna believe this. Go on Twitter. Now." Her fingers fumbled through the apps. And there it was. A grainy video, filmed from across the restaurant. Grayson Wolfe shouting. Naomi standing, spine straight, and then her words, clear as crystal. "You can buy a steak, sir, but you can't buy decency." The caption read, "Waitress stands up to tech billionaire at Michelin star restaurant and wins the whole room." Already over 600,000 views. She scrolled through the comments. Finally, someone puts him in his place. "Queen Energy. Hire her to run the city, please." There were dissenting voices too, of course. Servers should stay in their lane. Totally unprofessional. That's what you get for hiring attitude and aprons. But the overwhelming tide was support. One tag had gone viral. You can't buy decency. Naomi stared at her screen, numb. Her inbox was flooded. Marta, her old roommate from college, a local podcast asking for an interview, a message from someone claiming to be a producer from a morning show. She barely heard Zoe walk out into the living room. "Mommy," the little girl asked, tugging at her sleeve, "why is your phone being so loud?" Naomi knelt down and pulled her daughter into a hug. "Because the world's being noisy," she whispered. "Let's make pancakes before it gets noisier." While flipping chocolate chip pancakes in their tiny kitchen, she ignored the continued buzzing of her phone. It was all too much. She didn't want fame. She wanted rent money and enough quiet to braid Zoe's hair without her hands shaking. Marta called. Naomi answered on the third try. "Naomi, it's wild," Marta said breathlessly. "Reporters are outside the restaurant. The owners are calling an emergency meeting for noon. Management wants everyone in." Naomi's heart sank. "Do you think they'll fire me? Honestly, I don't know. But the public is on your side. That has to count for something." After breakfast, Naomi dropped Zoe off at Lydia's apartment, the kind neighbor who often watched her daughter in emergencies. She explained only that work was complicated and she might be late. Lydia, ever the optimist, squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens, you did something powerful. Just remember that." The streets outside Maison Toile were a circus. 3 camera crews waited outside. One reporter shouted, "Miss Clark, can we get a statement?" Another, "Did you know your words would go viral?" She kept her head down, pushing through the door where the maitre d' ushered her in with a quiet, "Hurry." In the private dining room, every staff member was already seated. Bartenders, sous chefs, runners, hostesses. Even Chef Renard stood in the back, arms folded, face unreadable. At the head of the room stood Franco, the general manager, and next to him, Veronica Steele, co-owner of Maison Toile. Naomi's breath caught. Veronica had the kind of presence that silenced rooms even before she spoke. Silver hair pulled into a low knot, slate gray eyes that missed nothing. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Franco began. "As you may know, last night's incident with a guest has drawn significant media attention." A murmur ran through the room. "We are now under public scrutiny. Miss Clark's actions have gone viral, and while Maison Toile has always stood for elegance and restraint, we must respond with clarity and unity." He nodded toward Veronica. She stepped forward. "Let me be clear," she said. "We do not condone rudeness or verbal abuse toward our staff, regardless of how wealthy or influential the customer may be." Naomi's mouth fell slightly open. Veronica's gaze swept the room until it landed squarely on her. "Naomi Clark," she said, "please step forward." The room fell silent. Naomi rose slowly, her legs stiff, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked to the front. Veronica studied her face. "You didn't ask for this attention, but your words struck a chord because they were honest, and because they were earned." Naomi blinked, unsure how to respond. "We will not be terminating your employment," Veronica continued. "In fact, we're proud that you had the composure to speak with such poise. You reminded us of something vital, that dignity belongs to everyone, not just the rich." The staff began to applaud. Chef Renard clapped once firmly. Franco smiled for the first time all morning. Naomi's knees wobbled. Veronica stepped closer. "However," she said softly, "we advise you not to speak to the media directly. Our PR team will handle inquiries. Do you understand?" "Yes," Naomi breathed. "Thank you. Truly." Veronica nodded. "Then that concludes this meeting." Naomi returned to her seat amid a chorus of supportive glances and shoulder pats. She was still trembling, but now it was from relief. Outside, the noise of the city resumed. But inside Naomi, something new had begun to stir, something stronger than fear. A sense of power, of voice, of direction. Naomi didn't expect to see her name trending for a second day in a row. She certainly didn't expect to see a meme of herself frozen mid-sentence, chin lifted, eyes steady, circulating among tweets that called her Queen of Service and the waitress who woke up Manhattan. Her inbox had become a battleground of opportunity and chaos. Journalists, influencers, nonprofits, strangers offering to buy her coffee, strangers offering to buy her a house, and of course, the inevitable trolls. She avoided most of it. After the emergency staff meeting, she returned to her shift like nothing had happened, smiled politely at new diners who whispered behind menus and nudged each other when she passed, and accepted every "you're amazing" with a quiet thank you. But the pressure simmered beneath every tray she carried. She wasn't trying to start a revolution. She was trying to pay rent. 2 days later, she was wiping down wine glasses at the bar when the maitre d' approached again, his tone softer this time. "Naomi," he said, gesturing discreetly, "there's someone here to see you. Veronica approved it." Her heart skipped. "A reporter?" "Not exactly." He tilted his head toward the far end of the bar where a tall man stood wearing a gray blazer, jeans, and impossibly clean sneakers. He was speaking with one of the junior sommeliers, but his eyes were scanning the room looking for her. Naomi blinked, then blinked again. "Is that—" "Yes," the maitre d' said, whispering now. "Bill Gates." Her knees almost gave out. "You're kidding. Do I look like I'm joking?" She didn't have time to think. She set the glass aside and approached, unsure what to do with her hands, her voice, her existence. Up close, he looked kind, ordinary, no entourage, just a man who had built an empire and decided, for reasons beyond her comprehension, to meet her. "Ms. Clark," he said, extending a hand. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, sir," she replied, shaking his hand. Wow, this is unexpected." "Veronica is an old acquaintance," he said. "She told me what happened here. I saw the video, and I wanted to say, personally, that what you did took courage." Naomi flushed. "Thank you, but I didn't plan it. I wasn't trying to go viral. I was just tired." "Most people are," he said softly, "but not everyone speaks up." He glanced around the room. "You reminded a lot of people that civility still matters." She didn't know what to say to that. He continued, "We're working on something, Veronica and I, a foundation. We want to use this moment, your moment, to highlight the dignity of service work. It's tentatively called Project Decency." Naomi raised her eyebrows. "Named after the line." Yes, it struck a nerve. "We think there's potential here, not just for awareness, but change, training, protections, public conversation. And we want you involved, if you're open to it." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Mr. Gates, I'm just a waitress. You're not just anything. You're the reason we're having this conversation." Before she could formulate a response, Veronica appeared, smiling warmly. "I see you've met," she said, touching Naomi's shoulder. Good. We'd love to invite you to a small event next week. Private. Select guests. No media. Just conversation. Naomi looked between the two of them. Sure. If it's after my shift, I can make that work. Veronica grinned. We'll arrange everything. That night, Naomi lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. Could she really do this? Be a spokesperson? Join a foundation? She remembered a time when she couldn't even speak up in a dance class without blushing. Now, people were asking her to lead. She picked up her phone and tapped open her messages. There was a new one from Marta. It was a photo. A note left on a napkin by a table she hadn't served. She made me cry, in the best way. Thank you for reminding the world. Attached was a tip, $500. Naomi set the phone down and exhaled. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe she'd never be ready. But something inside her had shifted, and she didn't want to go back. The following week, Maison Toile hosted a private gathering in one of its hidden lounges, normally reserved for billionaires or foreign dignitaries. Naomi arrived after her shift, still in her uniform. Veronica greeted her at the door and gently took her by the arm. "Let's fix that," she said, handing Naomi a simple black dress and a pair of heels. "Go change. You're not serving tonight. You're the reason we're all here." Naomi changed quickly in the staff restroom. When she stepped out, she barely recognized herself. She wasn't Naomi the waitress. She was Naomi Clark, the woman who'd said the sentence that ignited something more than applause. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere was warm but electric. Journalists from legacy outlets, tech founders, activists, even a few familiar faces from TV. Naomi stood near the back, sipping sparkling water and trying to disappear. But people kept approaching. A young woman from a nonprofit whispered, "I used to be a cashier. Thank you for what you did." A man in a perfectly tailored suit said, "I've worked in hospitality for 20 years. That sentence, 'You can't buy decency,' that was lightning." Then came the speeches. Veronica introduced the event with grace and precision, speaking of the need to realign how society treats service workers. "Dignity," she said, "is not a luxury. It is a right." Bill Gates followed, discussing the systemic gaps in how labor is valued and how one woman's quiet defiance had sparked a needed conversation. And then it was Naomi's turn. She hadn't written anything. She hadn't even expected to speak. But Veronica handed her the microphone and smiled as if to say, "You've done harder things." Naomi stepped to the front, hands trembling slightly. "Good evening," she began. "I never imagined I'd be speaking to a room like this. I came to New York to be a dancer. I ended up a waitress. I've poured wine for people I could never afford to dine beside. I've smiled through insults because I needed tips. I've told my daughter Zoe that kindness matters while wondering if it actually does." The room listened in silence. "I never set out to start a movement. I was just tired of being small. And in that moment when someone told me I was nothing, I chose to say something. Not to change the world, just to protect my own dignity, and maybe that was enough." Applause rose, not polite or performative, but real. Naomi blinked back tears and returned to her seat, heart pounding, cheeks flushed. After the event, Veronica pulled her aside. "We want you to be part of Project Decency," she said. "Part-time, to start. No pressure. But your voice, your lived experience matters. More than any boardroom speech ever could." Naomi hesitated. "I still need this job. I have Zoe. Rent." We'll work around it, and we'll compensate you fairly. Just think about it." That night, Naomi walked home through Manhattan's glittering streets, the city alive around her. She passed closed storefronts, steaming grates, the subway entrance where she'd once cried after missing a shift. Everything felt the same, and entirely different. She reached her apartment, tiptoed inside, and knelt beside Zoe's bed. Her daughter stirred, smiling in her sleep. Naomi pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "Maybe, just maybe, Mommy's doing something big." She stood, walked into the living room, and opened her phone. A new message had arrived. From Veronica. Subject line, "Next steps for Project Decency." Naomi clicked it open, her hand steady for the first time in days. She didn't know where this road would lead, but she knew she would walk it one steady, unapologetic step at a time. Naomi Clark sat at the window of her small Queens apartment, a warm mug of tea in her hands and the hush of a Sunday evening wrapping itself around her like a woolen shawl. Outside, the city blinked with neon and headlamps, sirens faint in the distance, the constant heartbeat of New York pressing on like always. But inside her, something had changed. She stared at her phone, its screen glowing softly on the couch beside her. The email from Veronica was still open. Formal offer, ambassador role, Project Decency. It was real. Salary, travel allowance, schedule flexibility, and full support for single parents. A paid position to speak on behalf of workers like her servers, busboys, line cooks, cashiers, those who were expected to smile while being stepped on. And they wanted her. She should have felt triumphant. But the truth was, she felt terrified. She glanced at the folded laundry in the corner, the dishes drying on the rack, the coloring books sprawled across the coffee table where Zoe had spent the afternoon drawing ballerinas with wings. This life, small, steady, hard-earned, was all she'd known. Speaking at glamorous events, flying to conferences, taking interviews, it wasn't her world. Not yet. She picked up her phone and called the one person who always knew how to cut through her worry. "Hey," said Marta on the other end, her voice warm and immediate. "What's wrong?" "How do you always know?" "Because it's me, and your voice sounds like you're standing on a cliff." Naomi exhaled. "They offered me a position with the foundation, like an actual job, a real one. It pays more than I've ever made, and I'm scared out of my mind." There was a pause. Then Marta said, "Naomi, you told a billionaire in front of 100 strangers that he couldn't buy decency. I think you can handle a job offer." Naomi laughed despite herself. "It's not just me, it's Zoe. It's rent. It's the fear that if I take this leap, there won't be a net under me." "Then build your own net," Marta said gently. "You already started. Maybe this is the rest of it." The next morning, Naomi took Zoe to school and walked the long way back, through side streets dotted with bodegas and playgrounds. The city buzzed around her as if oblivious to her dilemma, but in every construction worker's nod, every barista's weary smile, she saw the truth. The world was full of people who needed someone to speak for them. That afternoon, she clicked reply and typed 3 words. "I'm all in." What followed was a whirlwind. Within days, Project Decency went public. The launch video included footage from Naomi's now famous moment, cut between shots of dishwashers scrubbing pots, teachers being ignored, and nurses working double shifts. The Foundation's mission: to elevate the voices of underappreciated workers, to advocate for labor rights, and to remind corporations that dignity wasn't optional. Naomi became its face and then its voice. Her first speaking engagement was at a university in Boston. She wore a blazer from a second-hand store and practiced her speech in front of Zoe, who interrupted twice to ask if she could have mac and cheese for dinner. "Yes," Naomi said, smiling. "Now sit still, or Mommy's gonna forget her lines." Standing behind the podium, Naomi felt her knees tremble, but when she began to speak, everything inside her stilled. "I was a waitress. I still am, in many ways. But for a long time, I believed my worth was tied to my silence, that if I just smiled enough, swallowed enough, people would leave me alone. Then, one night, someone shouted at me loud enough for the world to hear. And I answered, not because I'm brave, but because I had no choice." The students applauded. Faculty members thanked her. A woman in the back wept softly into her scarf. Soon, she was invited to panels, roundtables, and town halls. She shared stages with union leaders and lawmakers. She spoke to high schoolers, telling them that their voices mattered even before they were hired. She recorded a podcast with Veronica, titled The Cost of a Steak, which went viral in under 24 hours. Zoe began calling her Mommy with a microphone. One day, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just a folded sheet of stationery. In neat handwriting it read, "You reminded me of my sister. She was a server too. No one stood up for her. Thank you for standing up for all of us. M." Naomi pressed it to her chest and cried. Months passed. Maison Toile remained a second home, though now she only worked weekends, by choice. She still liked the rhythm of service, the clink of glassware, the choreography of dinner rush. But the staff treated her differently now, not with awe, but with respect. One Saturday evening, she arrived early to help polish silverware. Chef Renard approached, his usual gruffness softened by a twinkle in his eye. "You've gone national," he said. "I saw you on PBS. You didn't burn the reputation, you tempered it." Naomi smiled. "I had a good teacher." He grunted. "You still hold a plate wrong." "Liar," she teased. "You love how I hold plates." And then came the night that truly changed everything. Veronica invited her to the Project Decency Gala, a formal event at a rooftop venue in Midtown, filled with hundreds of guests from across industries. Naomi wore a deep green gown borrowed from Marta's cousin and arrived with Zoe on her hip, the little girl in a matching dress and glittery shoes. As they entered the ballroom, cameras flashed not paparazzi, but supporters, reporters, everyday folks who had followed Naomi's journey from the moment she stood at table 12 and refused to be small. On stage, Veronica opened the night with her usual grace. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate the power of one voice." Then she stepped aside. Naomi took the stage to a standing ovation. She waited for the room to settle, then spoke. "I was never meant to be here, but maybe none of us are ever meant to be brave. Maybe bravery finds us in the cracks, in the small moments, in the seconds where silence feels unbearable." She glanced at Zoe, sitting at a table nearby, legs swinging beneath her chair. "I didn't speak up that night for applause. I spoke up because I saw my daughter's face in my mind, and I knew she'd ask me one day if I let someone treat me like less. And I wanted to tell her that I didn't." She paused. "I wasn't the only one that night. The entire room helped me. With their silence, with their claps, with their eyes. We don't speak alone. We echo each other. We lift each other." She finished with a quiet but powerful line. "You can buy a steak, but you cannot buy decency. You can only choose it." The applause this time was thunderous, but louder than the claps, louder than the accolades, was the quiet sound of Zoe's voice from the front row. "That's my mommy." And that was everything. After the gala, Naomi was offered a permanent leadership position within the foundation. She accepted. She helped draft policy recommendations, consulted on worker protection legislation, and designed empowerment workshops for underpaid industries. Years later, when a new wave of workers began quoting her sentence in protests and articles, Naomi smiled and shook her head. She hadn't meant to become a movement, but maybe movements were just made of people who refused to shrink. She still visited Maison Toile, still hugged Marta, still sat at the corner booth where it all began. But now, she did so as a woman who remembered where she came from and was no longer afraid of where she was going. And somewhere in a school hallway, Zoe told her friends, "My mom is the reason people are nicer now." And maybe, just maybe, she was right.